Hello to all and welcome back to War Thunder Aviation for the last day of my 3-day extravaganza of patch 1.65, also known as Way of the Samurai. Now for our final day we will be looking at the N1K1 hydroplane and have a look at this aircraft both in real life and War Thunder. So, as per usual, if you want to just skip ahead to the review of it in War Thunder, then go to the time on your screens now. Otherwise, let's get into the history of this aircraft and see what made it what it was. So then, the N1K1's full name was the Kawanishi N1K Kyofu, or Strong Wind in Japanese. Now, this name had the Allied reporting name of Rex, and was a float plane designed by the Japanese Imperial Navy. Now, interestingly enough, the N1K series of aircraft was started by the N1K1, of course being the first of the series, and the first to have ever saw combat with the Japanese Navy. Now, the N1K1 was designed with a pontoon, and the reason was simple. You see, this aircraft was designed in the, well, knowledge, I say, of Japan by the point it would enter service to be on the offensive, and could be used against enemies where there wouldn't be runways available for Japanese fighters. However, ironically enough, by the time this did see combat in 1943, unfortunately for the Japanese Navy, and indeed for this aircraft, Japan was on the full defensive, and very little offensive actions were taken from that year and onwards. But one could argue that this aircraft was almost designed to fail, as it was found quite early on that this aircraft, with its extra pontoon and bulky requirements to allow it to sit on water, made the aircraft a lot slower and less manoeuvrable than American equivalents. It was for this reason that it was quite soon on, in fact as early as 1941, suggested that the N1K should have other variants made of it without the pontoon as a land-based fighter. Now, I could go into more detail with said land-based fighters, but of course that is not what we are talking about today. We are talking about the N1K1 and not the future aircraft such as the N1K2s and so on. Now, the original prototype for this design actually had many differences to the design you see now. First of all, it had a Kasai 14 series engine. It only had a two-bladed propeller system and had retractable floats under each wing. However, during tests in May the 6th, 1942, it was found that it was suboptimal in flight performance, and many changes were made to all I've just mentioned. Now, these changes consisted of the Kasai 14 engine changing to the Kasai 13 engine, changing from a twin blade system to a triple blade system, and changing the retractable float under each wing to fixed floats under each wing. Now, whether or not you think all these improvements were good or not, I for one can't really understand why you'd get rid of the retractable float. I would imagine that would only ever improve flight performance, but regardless, after its second test flight, with all these new characteristics, it was found to be a lot more promising, and throughout its career with the Japanese Navy that lasted from 1943 to 1945, it was seen to have been an excellent aircraft with generally good manoeuvrability in the air, good armament, and all around a well-rounded plane. And that's really the whole story of the N1K1 float plane. It's quite a short one, I'll admit, and often I find with looking up this kind of stuff that the Japanese aircraft always have the least on them. But regardless, that is basically all you need to know about this aircraft. All I could really find with this aircraft, and with all that in mind, let's get into the aircraft in-game and see if it lives up to its World War II expectations. So, sitting at a 2.7 battle rating in Tier 2, we can already see that this aircraft will, on average, be fighting aircraft that it didn't really do in real life. Often in Tier 2 you're looking at aircraft that were, well, used and designed in things like 1941 and 42. It's not very often you'll see quite late war and even end war aircraft like this, as it did see out the war at such low levels. But with this in mind, I don't think that it does it any harm being at such a low battle rating, and I think it is a more than fair aircraft. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the advantages of said aircraft. Now, the first advantage I will talk about of this aircraft is one that is pretty obvious and something that could be considered as a disadvantage, but personally I've never had problems with, and I think is all in all pretty fine. And that is its floats. Now, due to these floats, it means it can land on water, which is something that very few aircraft can do. But not only this, it also means that it is a lot easier to land than standard carrier-based aircraft, as you don't have to land it on a carrier, you just have to land on the sea near the carrier, which is a lot more forgiving if you get it wrong, of course. But as I've already said, many people see this as a disadvantage, as they see the big pontoon on it, and they think, well, it's a water-based aircraft, so it can only land on the water, therefore making it useless in most maps in War Thunder. And although it is true it's only made for landing on water, I personally have never had a problem landing this on the land and on runways. In fact, if you land it at a relatively slow speeds, whilst maintaining relative horizontalness to the runway, so basically going for a pretty standard landing, if not a little bit slower than usual, then you'll have no problems, and indeed I never have. In fact, the lack of gear means this thing will land and stop a lot faster than if it was to have wheels, as it will scrape along the ground, which makes it stop a hell of a lot faster. So actually, I call that more of an advantage than a disadvantage, but once again, that's just me. The next advantage I will discuss is its turn time, which is around 19 seconds without WEP and 18 seconds with WEP. Now, I'm not entirely sure if these figures are with flaps. I don't believe they are, so I imagine it can do even better if you deploy landing flaps while turning in this thing. So all in all, it's a pretty agile little aircraft, and considering it has the extra weight of the floats on the bottom, it's quite incredible, to be honest, that it can turn the way it does, and once again offers another great advantage of the aircraft. Also, a third advantage of this aircraft is that it doesn't have a half-bad armament. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's a good armament by any means. As we all know, Japanese 20mm are probably the worst in the game, and the 7.7s are not a lot better. So, it probably has some of the worst armament you're going to see, but for its battle rating, two 20mm with 200 rounds altogether, and two 7.7mm with enough ammunition that you're probably never going to run out of them, and you actually equal a not a half bad armament for its battle rating. So all in all, I'm going to give this aircraft armament a pass and say that it is actually an advantage at its battle rating. And that largely concludes the advantages of the aircraft, as we now go into the disadvantages of the aircraft. Now, the first major disadvantage of this aircraft, and in fact the biggest disadvantage of this aircraft, is its speed, as at its ideal altitude of 5,700 meters, it unfortunately has a max speed of only 305 miles an hour, which is pretty slow, even for its battle rating. And once again, I'm imagining this is more than likely due to the extra pontoons on it that are slowing it down. But once again, that's just me. The second disadvantage of this aircraft is that, despite the fact this is a fighter, its maximum G limit is only 7.5, which is pretty bad for a fighter, and means that often when you're trying to turn with enemies and what have you, you'll get the G warning pop up, as you've probably already seen on the clips I am showing. Now, if in case you are interested, the structural failure G limit for minus Gs is minus 4.5, but to be honest, I don't really go with minus Gs as they're, well, something you should avoid at all costs anyway, so we can ignore that for now. And disadvantages-wise, that's about all there is. So, with all that in mind, let's now go to all other extra features of this aircraft I have not yet mentioned. Now, first off the bat, there is a bomb load on this aircraft, would you believe it? And this bomb load allows for two 50-kilogram bombs to be put on the aircraft, which is not an advantage or a disadvantage. I mean, it's a disadvantage as that's an incredibly tiny bombs and won't do much, hence why pretty much no one ever uses them, but is an advantage in the respect of, well, it's better than nothing, I suppose, so that's something that should be considered when choosing this aircraft. Another thing to keep in mind that the airspeed warning for this aircraft will appear at 373 miles an hour once aced. This, in case you aren't already aware, is a lot worse than most fighters at this battle rating, so once again, I do strongly advise that you're a little bit more careful on your descents with this aircraft. Not only that, but as already said, when this thing gets up to high speed and turns, if you get over 7.5 positive Gs, then you can very likely rip your own wings off. So, as already mentioned, this aircraft isn't too good when it comes to speed in any way. And that largely concludes the review of this aircraft, which leaves the final questions for the night of, should you get the N1K1 flying boat? Yeah, I think so. I honestly find this a lot of fun, and I have to admit, I quite like flying boats. There's something so humble about them that I just can't get enough of, and I absolutely adore flying them for that reason. So, with that in mind, yes, I could only recommend this aircraft, and as long as you don't mind going a bit on the slow side, then you won't really have any problems. But then again, with that in mind, considering just about every aircraft in low-level Japan is slow as all balls, it won't be anything you're not already used to. So that's all from me for the review, and before I go, I just want to say that this will probably be the final video I make before Christmas. It may not be, I may make another if I'm up for it, or if I get a good game and I want to put that up. But either way, I hope you like the 3 days of constant work I've been doing to get these videos out on time for all you people up to Christmas, and, well, that's all I have to say. So I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and until next time, I say thank you very much, and I'll see you then.